Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Lapel for New Focus Recordings. I'm joined by Counter Induction, who had a wonderful release come out a couple weeks ago, Against Method. We've got Douglas Boyce, Jess Meyer, Ben Fingland, Caleb Vanderswag, and our wonderful friend, guest composer Diego Tedesco, joining us from Buenos Aires. And I'm a member of CI2. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you guys. Hope everybody's doing okay. So CI is celebrating a 20th anniversary, and this CD is a manifestation of that. You guys want to take us back to the nascent days of Counter Induction and give us a little background?
Sure, I could talk about that. I was at the Aspen Music Festival as a violist from 94 to 97. And one of those years, I met Douglas as a roommate of two of my best string buddies out in Snowmass. And it was one of those moments where I was sitting at a table with him waiting for those guys to be ready to go to some practice session somewhere. And he was just furiously scribbling out a part or on the score. And I just had that feeling of recognition like when you meet somebody and you know that you're going to know them for a long time. Similarly, I felt that with different people in the group, and especially with Caleb when I first started to hang out with him. And
Oh, hopefully, Ben.
I was going
yeah,
to say,
yeah,
me
yeah.
too. Am I oh, man. Throw me a bone here.
Yeah, you're like a 20.
No, actually, noticeably not with you. Yeah. Just a sense of obligation. Yeah.
Spoilers, just obligation. Yeah.
But no, and it was when we got home from Aspen. We both went back to Juilliard, and Douglas was in Philadelphia at University of Pennsylvania, and that's when this whole dialogue started. It's like, hey, we have this comp program out here, and wouldn't it be great if you and Ben came out and did this piece? And also, I had a graduate recital coming up, and Douglas wrote a trio merely circulating, so for viola, clarinet, and piano, and he actually came to play the piano part. And that was when sort of the beginning discussion started, where I was realizing, like, wow, okay, I know a lot of great players, but I don't know composers. We've been playing a lot of new music with like the new Juilliard ensemble and all sorts of things, but like people that like living composers our age, we didn't really know.
Right.
And I said, if you know those people, I know the players, and we know the players. Like, let's do something together, and that's kind of was the start of Counter Induction.
Right.
You know,
The Genesis.
and Doug came up with all that had this very clear philosophy around it that he could speak about.
Well, I think that what you described is a really important part of, the history, but also the philosophy in that it is. I think the goal has always been things that are highly practical, but also very considered. We do the things that we think are good. We do the things that we think are important. And not the only things that we think are important. We all have sort of other lives, other parts of our lives, and other partnerships and other things. But there's a particular character to what we do, and there was something about that contrariness in what we were doing, which has always been sort of. I've been interested in the work of Fire Alvin for a very long time, since, God, I could probably put a year on it, 1990, 1989, doing some history of science work in philosophy programs at Williams, and I was a physicist, but it was like insufficient, and I was always sort of like trying to find what was out there, what was missing in that dialogue. And Fire Alvin, as a thinker, is incredible about that. He always sort of pushes you outside of where you're thinking. And for me, I think there's, in this contrarianness, there's a search for something, maybe it's universal, maybe it's collective, maybe it's general, but somehow it's always rooted in specifics. There's this sort of deep immediacy of who are we playing, who are we writing for, who is playing, what is that instrument, very rooted in the fiber of being. there's this really deep consideration of history, of historicality of music, which for Feyerabend, it's in his discussion in the great book Against Method, in his discussion of Galileo and Galileo's trio and Galileo's sort of ferocious overclaiming, right? That he's sort of, I know this is how things work in the world, and he doesn't know how his telescope works. Right? That's really sort of the root of Feyerabend's argument. And it's only when you look back at that event historically that you say, oh, wow, this is actually one of the interesting things about Galileo is that he's a great bullshitter. And he sort of finagles his way into this truth. And I also think there is, for me at least, there's been a commitment to a certain kind of cosmopolitanism. And so again, sort of discovering Diego as this person sort of far away, that seems to connect to so many of the things that we do and that we're interested in. It's sort of a lovely moment, I think, a lovely opportunity.
I found you, all you, and you are my family.
That's really, it's really sweet. It speaks to this sort of, I think, this intriguing network of.
I met first Miranda and Benny in 14 in Wesley. Then I met Jessica in a concert in Wesley, at Wesley in 17. You remember that, Jessica?
Wow, yeah.
Seems like forever ago.
It was a
Yeah.
long
Then you wrote me, Doug. You wrote me about peace.
Totally cool.
I met you by mail.
Yeah.
Then I met Dan in Buenos Aires here.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, like, primarily, obviously Diego's talking about meeting at the Composers Conference at Wellesley under the wing of the great Mario Davidovsky, who was a great mentor to all of us. And 2014 was kind of a pivotal year because, of course, I'd heard about Mario forever. I'd heard his music. I'd never met the guy. And suddenly, Counter-Induction's doing an 80th birthday concert. Wellesley is celebrating, the Composers Conference at Wellesley is celebrating his 80th birthday with a big festival there. In Buenos Aires, we had a big concert, and suddenly, from hearing about Mario, never meeting him, suddenly, I think from about May of 2014 through September of 2014, that's all I knew was Mario and his music and meeting Diego, and suddenly it was like a totally new world was open up to me, and I know our experience. Jessica remembers this very well. Actually, having the luxury of coaching with Mario for the concert that we gave in New York of his music. Yeah. He's like this kind of legend who we just assumed was untouchable, and then it's like, no, he lives on the Upper West Side. He's going to come to all of our rehearsals. Like, what? This is real. I had no idea that this guy was around and available, and so that was another great sort of marker in Counter-Induction's history. And we were fortunate enough to meet him when we did, just a few years really before he passed. To experience him and his amazing music and his wonderful ebullient attitude towards contemporary music and historical music and everything musical. And it was really life-changing, and then meeting Diego was part of that. And it's funny that I met him along with Miranda during that Composers Conference, and then Kyle was there a few years later, and then he met Douglas kind of separately and randomly, and Dan as well. But we're all in that same hemisphere. This whole group is kind of, on the same page, which I really.
But to actually have more involved relationships with composers,
being able to interact with sort of as we see them now, since they passed, Lee passing and Mario passing, these real sort of icons, these cultural icons of contemporary music. Unfortunately, during that 80th anniversary concert, we received the news of Lee Hyler's passing, and Mario was really devastated too, because he knew and respected him. And so, you have this whole kind of circle encompassing what CI does, and on this one pivotal day, sort of in history, we're celebrating the 80th birthday of one great composer and mourning the passing of another one. It all kind of comes together, and we're very fortunate to have had that contact with these great people.
But just to add just one more thing, I think that what's something that's about the whole fire up and aesthetic and counterinduction and the idea of going beyond what's expected is that a lot of new music groups tend to align themselves with specific aesthetics of music. Like, okay, are you like a Brooklyn kind of group? Are you this kind of group? And we had in the beginning kind of spent some time in Vermont, where Doug's parents used to live, like sort of hashing out like what's counterinduction? Like, what is our thing? And then at the end of the day, we realized that it's not about that at all. It's about very specific composers, how great their work is, our relationships with them, and how we put together a concert program. Yeah. And that became what our history is, I feel.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. It's like I was saying before. That's there's somehow achieving either through a CD or a concert program or program notes or what is specific in this moment. What is different about this event than the other event? And when you do that, genre kind of goes away.
Right.
And lots of things about identity kind of goes away, or maybe are sort of sublimated into this richer thing, which is just the experience of music, the experience of making music, the experience of hearing music. Which is why I think when even at a great distance, like with Diego, if that's in your forefront, you hear something from him. In this case Diego, but someone. We've had experiences with other composers. It's like, no, this person, this is a person who's thinking about in a way that's outside of language, outside of genre, in the moment of performing. It's like, yes, this is what we do, and we're not going to worry about the branding as much. Now that maybe is the great counterproductive moment of to say, no, don't encapsulate it, don't name it, do it. And let the doing handle the rest.
And this album, like, you have a lot of different styles. Like, everyone who's on the album is writing in a very, in a contrasting way, and I think that's what makes it great. As far as like I think it's like many. I mean, it's a great. But I'm saying, like, that's what we strive in all of our concerts. Like, we don't want this piece to sound like this piece to sound like this piece. It's like, we want everybody's piece to stand out in themselves.
It's certainly not a genre-specific album at all.
Right.
That's quite the opposite. Yeah, which is great. There's something for everyone. And
let's talk Hunt by Night. Let's talk Trio Etude.
So Hunt by Night is what will hopefully be, if I finish it ever, the last of a set of 21 pieces. That look at all possible combinations of cello, clarinet, and piano, 3 of each collection. And in doing that project, again, this sort of, I think, ties back into the thing we've been talking about. I mean, Ben will agree, it's not an easy piece. It is kind of a workout, but it's not necessarily an etude in the in that sense. Like the trio etudes, the 2 that have been written, they're very much the study that is undertaken is what it is to play together, is the nature of playing together. And Ben, you've played both. The first one of the set is this sort of like, we're in a meter, we're not in a meter. We're sort of, we're in a sort of minimalist space, we're not in a minimalist place. And this one that's on this disc, sets a different kind of challenge. Kyle described it once as if Robert Fripp listened to more Messiaen than Bartok, right? The harmony is all sort of Messiaen, but it has this sort of, grindingness to it over and over again. And so I think it works nicely on the disc as this sort of opening, fairly aggressive, focused, a little bit of a show off piece for the ensemble to be like, yeah, that's right, we do this. Yeah, get ready. And which again, in exactly the way we've been talking about, then opens the door for these other pieces inside that many of them are much more delicate. And so it is sort of an opening gesture for the disc. Ben, you're the one who suffered through the recordings. Am I missing anything?
Opening salvo, perhaps. Yes.
yes. And if you read in the program notes, there's a painting that it refers to, and there's a poet that talks about that painting that it refers to, which, if you want to dig into it itself, has this sort of historicality that we've been talking about in the general counterinduction interest. These sort of layers upon layers of reference as it connects to, but mostly it's kind of a barn burner.
We take a listen to about a minute of it to give folks a flavor of this dynamic barn burner of a piece.
Yeah, and it'll just be the absolute opening of it. Which
Okay,
makes sense.
so and this is Ben Finglin on clarinet, Caleb van der Swag on cello, and Ning Yu, another member of the ensemble. Great. So that was the first track off the album, Douglas Boyce's Hunt by Night. And I'm going to throw it to Caleb over here, who performed the auspicious cello part on that piece. You want to talk a little bit about the sort of moral fortitude that was involved in
Well, it is it's interesting when, as Douglas was talking about the historical considerations, both in the group and also in that piece. And I think this is something that I think we'll return to when we're talking about Ryan's piano quartet.
Yeah.
But there was part of it where there's definitely a tradition involved with this instrumentation. It doesn't have a huge amount of, standard repertoire to it, but a couple of, certainly the Bronx Trio, a couple other pieces where there are these kind of like very iconic works for the instrumentation. So it's definitely entering into, I would assume, very consciously into the, tradition of that ensemble and that repertoire and the instrumentation. And and it's interesting that, like, there's always, whenever you have this, string clarinet, the piano clarinet string repertoire, the dynamic between the strings and the clarinet is always an important component as to the ways in which the clarinet and the cello are similar, both, melodic instruments, and, similar ranges, and to the way they're in very different families. And I think that's something that is in this piece as well, in terms of the degree of there's a unison playing that then diverges and comes back.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very much, very much so.
Yeah. So
that's good. You're paying attention. That's good.
You know, I was, yeah, I was there. And
And so I think, you know, the next piece is from Kyle, right?
Right, Kyle Bartlett, co-artistic director and also co-founder.
Very severe. There's a bit of a running joke that, you know, Kyle is the severe one as the composer in the group. Maybe it's not a running joke, it's just sort of a running theme. There's a sort of clarity and intensity to the music, which is quite striking, unlike this guy, Ryan Streber, who is the elegant one.
Hey.
We're talking about Kyle. And so for me on the disc, in a funny way, I feel like we were talking about it being balanced. In some ways, I feel like all the other pieces almost orbit around Kyle's piece. There's this sort of excessiveness, maybe not for Ryan's, but for everyone's, it's like there's so much going on. And then here's this piece which just is just what it is, these silences, these reduced materials, which again, I think is a beautiful manifestation of the way we think about programming about a lot of things. Jess?
No, I was just thinking of Kyle's work and just the extremes. She's
Yeah.
really just in the extremes of sound, or she's really going towards the extreme of fragility. What I particularly love is that every composer on this disc explores intensity and fragility in a different way, and with sound, spectrally, and I think that's really interesting. So, but I think Kyle, and I think in you know, also instrumentally, you know, there's so, like, you know, typically before Dan came on, it's the pianist and the cellist that would be overtaxed with playing almost all of the pieces. And so when you have someone, what guitar does is that it's another multifaceted instrument where you can have a lot of harmony going on at the same time, like the piano, so it could slide in as serving another role. And so that's been interesting, and also a challenge, but also a great opportunity. And I think that's, you know, Kyle was really exploring that in her piece. For sure. You know.
Yeah, I feel one of the things about Kyle's piece, you know, of the repertoire on this disc, it's the piece that uses the most, the sort of the broadest extended technique vocabulary or sonic vocabulary.
Oh yeah.
But it's still, and despite the fact that there are a lot of sort of poignant silences, and I wouldn't characterize it as a dense piece, it still feels very structurally taut to me, very sort of cohesive, and hangs together in a very, and the way I feel like I know that as a performer is because it's very clear to me when I've done something that doesn't serve the structure, even just coming in after a fermata too quickly, or not letting a rest breathe. In Kyle's music, this has global implications, and it shows me just how tightly written what she does is. So maybe let's listen to it a little bit and let the music speak for itself for a second. This is a minute's worth of Kyle Bartlett's Before. Myself on guitar, Caleb on cello, and Ben on bass clarinet. Great. So that was a little snippet from Kyle Bartlett's Before. which is the second track off of Against Method, the album that we all released, I guess, 2 weeks ago now. It seems like the longest 2 weeks of many of our lives. We are in November 2020. And I should say that the session that we did on Kyle's piece and Jessica's piece that we'll talk about in a minute, and the piece that's next on the album, Alvin Singleton's Ein kleines Volkslied, were all done during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're happy to have Ryan Streber, wonderful composer, great friend, proprietor of Octavian Audio, with us. And Ryan found a way to make these sessions possible during the pandemic. And we did this work in a creative and safe way by isolating with video feeds and headphones, and we feel very grateful that we could actually keep this project going, make it happen. So thank you to Ryan for facilitating that.
My pleasure.
And this next piece on the record, Alvin Singleton's piece, the backstory there, this is the one piece on the album that is not written for Counter Induction. It was actually written for the Bang on a Can All-Stars about 20 so years ago, I think in 1997, if I remember right. Alvin Singleton had been a composer whose music I'd been very interested in for a while. And as a result of the conversation was happening, I was digging through his catalog and I came upon this piece and realized, whoa, there's a piece that he has, a guitar piece that's not super far from the Counter Induction instrumentation, but it's never been recorded. And it was just sitting there sort of begging to be recorded. It has a similar sort of duality with respect to some different aesthetic components in the work. Since it was written for Bang on a Can, it sort of has a nod towards populism, but Singleton sort of deftly like deconstructs that a little bit, and each instrument sort of finds its own little motivic language, and it gets turned around like a Rubik's Cube a bit. We felt it made a really wonderful addition to the album. It also expands the instrumentation slightly by adding vibraphone and double bass. So we made it happen, and I think really is like a nice compliment to the album, and sort of being right in the middle of the project in the program. I think it also sort of represents a bit of an instrument and density arc, and then it comes back down from that. So so maybe let's again let the music speak for itself a little bit. This is Alvin Singleton's Ein kleines Volkslied. I'm on electric guitar, Ben's on clarinet, Caleb's on cello. We have Randy Ziegler on bass, Renata Rolfing on piano, and Jeff Irving, who's a frequent Counter Induction guest collaborator over the years, on vibraphone. Ryan Streber at the controls. Here it is, Alvin Singleton. So that was Alvin Singleton's, or an excerpt from Alvin Singleton's Ein kleines Volkslied. And actually, we can pivot to the next track on the disc by Jess Meyer, played by Ben Fingland, and also recorded at Octavian Audio on the same day that we did the Kyle Bartlett session, and also deftly facilitated by Ryan Streber and Jess Slavin, who found a way to make all this work during a pandemic.
it's funny for me. It's a very interesting perspective. So that I'm a late in life composer, and I spent essentially the first 20 some odd years of my career interpreting other people's work before I finally came to the realization that I need to be also the one creating it. And I started off about like 7 or 8 years ago, writing for myself in a loop machine, and I put out a whole bunch of viola material, and then I think we had a concert coming up at Spectrum, and Ben was doing a recital, and I think you were looking for things to do, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I think this is the time when I write you something, and this piece for bass clarinet and loop machine, I didn't want to tax him with the rhythmic exactness that most of my looper music has, that you have to hit the pedal exactly at this particular time in order to make the duration of the loop and all the counterpoint work. I wanted to create a piece where the counterpoint had a lot of happy accidents, if you will. And so that's how I wrote Forgiveness, which starts off with, as any long-term couple knows, that you go through this process many different times. And this idea of using your voice and your breaths, to mimic that feeling of being upset, but also what I love about Ben's bass clarinet playing is that very few clarinetists can actually get the range that he can do on the bass clarinet to be equally virtuosic in a low range that it's typically written for, but also in the altissima range, and to have that expressive quality, and to be able to capture all that in a piece where the form is, okay, like, we'll set this loop, but then after that, like, play these notes and just play against what you're hearing and what feels good at the time. And that's sort of how the piece came about.
Right. So sort of it's built on a pretty rigid structure, but within that structure, there's this instruction to be pretty instinctive about how you react to what's coming back to you from the speakers. So
this is where,
really
like,
neat part of it.
The whole studio magic comes in, is because I recorded both of my albums with Ryan, and I implicitly trust him with my musical life, and he knows that. And so, like, when I'm in the control room with him, I could say, I like that, maybe something like that. This was, and then do the mix, and I and he knows what to do, and there are a couple of counterpoint, like in this piece, normally, like, I would want certain harmonic tensions to happen in certain places, and I could have written that all out to be exact, but I wanted that improvisatory feeling on behalf of the player to not have it be so macromanaged. But in the magic of recording, we recorded a couple of different versions, and then, some versions lined up in a certain way, and other versions lined up in another way, and all I had to do was tell Ryan, I'm like, I really liked it better when this gesture blossomed in this way against that note. And he's like, I know exactly what you're talking about, and then made that mix, and
it was a fairly...
That's why we love him. Again, it's like the whole reason why making any album, I recently came out with my first composer portrait album, and it's like, well, why make an album? But I remember, like, before my father passed, he actually made an album where you could finally hear what he really sounds like, exactly how he wanted to sound like. And I think that's the whole beauty about what we do now. Is like, these pieces are artifacts of exactly how we want them, as composers and as players. And to have the ability to make them and have control, have that kind of control, that's what exists outside of a live performance,
And
is the reasons why we make albums.
And that wouldn't be possible without a true collaborative process where everyone's on the same page. I mean, Ryan knows Jess's aesthetic, she knows his aesthetic. Everyone can communicate on almost an unspoken level, and I think that's what sort of elevates things to the next level ultimately for something like this, where you can just trust your colleagues and the product's going to be great. So
yeah.
that was the whole thing behind that, which is a lot of fun.
Great. Let's listen. This is like the climactic passage, or one of the climactic passages in Forgiveness.
this next piece is Ryan's piece, right? For piano quartet. And I think that all of us in the group in many different times after Ryan has joined has always had to prod him to come out of the Octavan cave and to be writing, because he's a wonderful composer. And I think what emerged is this wonderful piano quartet that actually really allows, usually this particular instrumentation is a challenge to make everybody heard in the group, and competing with the piano or competing with the highs and the lows of the strings. And there's so much, again, like talking about intensity versus fragility, like it's completely explored.
Oh, thanks, guys. Yeah, I hadn't written anything since this was the first like full kind of ground up, slightly larger piece that I'd written since the duo for you guys in 2013, I think. Actually, I think I wrote it in 2012 and it was premiered in 2013. And yeah, I just don't, one of the things I'm very fortunate with at, working at a studio like this is that I am kind of oversaturated with music, and especially contemporary music. And that's a great thing, but it also makes it kind of hard when you suddenly put on your composer hat and try to figure out what it is that you have to say or to add to the conversation. I'm kind of more and more shy these days about what I'm putting out into the the dialogue that everyone's having. But I was really happy to be able to do this piece, and I kind of in the way that I trust you guys implicitly, and it's just it's such an honor to write for a group of musicians like this that are just so amazing and so sensitive and caring, and yeah, I'm so happy with how it all came together in the end. So yeah. Thank you, guys.
Oh, I was just going to say, Ryan said, you're about what you're putting out in the conversation, and I feel like one of the things that's interesting about this piece is that maybe more so than any new piece that I played in a while, it's like so much in the in the classical conversation, like it's so much in just because of the instrumentation and the I don't mean that it's old fashioned, but I mean that it's like very directly engaging with chamber music, chamber music history, and both the language and everything. And yeah, I think I probably I'm speaking for Jessica too. I mean, I think that was one of the things that was very enjoyable to play about it, is that you used, I think we probably all used like a broad range of our abilities, to play that. I mean, it's true for all the pieces we play, of course, but I mean, but it tied, it brought in a number of different facets. Yeah,
I'm still really kind of self-conscious about how old-fashioned the piece is, but I figured I'd just kind of go with it and not worry too much about it. So, it is what it is, I guess. But
should we listen to a little bit of this piece, Ryan Streber's piano quartet? So we got Caleb on cello, Jess on viola, Miranda Cookson, of course, another CI member who wasn't on a piece until this one on this.
wow, right.
And Ning Yu is playing piano. Here we go. Great. So that was Ryan Streber's piano quartet. And the last track on the disc is from our dear friend Diego Tedesco, your Scherzo. And I feel like there's an affinity between your piece and Ryan's and Douglas's in a way, this sort of mining of a kind of interaction between the instruments that's very much in the chamber music tradition, whereas the other three pieces on the CD are a bit more deconstructed in one form or another. And I'm curious, I think, is it accurate to say that you sort of picked the instrumentation first and then started to sort of flesh out the piece?
First, I picked the instrumentation, and then the piece was developing itself. I don't know. The piece was born in a conversation with Kyle, and I started to think about it, and then I knew that you were at the group, and I don't know, and then the Scherzo brings you to life.
Yeah, to me,
so I'm sorry. At this time, you have noticed that my English is even worse than my Spanish. So I'm so sorry.
I
would need a translator or something like that.
But you were one of the first pieces written for all of us in the new instrumentation.
Right.
I think
Yes.
so that was really like I think between that and the Ricks, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think our first real concert with Dan actually
Was on your piece.
was really your piece and Steve Rick's piece, right? I mean, that was sort of
right.
like
First concert with me as a member, I guess. I guessed it with you guys before, but yeah.
So it's like you're a composer that helped evolve to counter induction to 3.0, but 2.0 in the sense of new.
Yeah.
You know. So
I think, I mean, for me, I really associate the Scherzo also very closely with Mario too. I feel like there's this sort of a certain kind of Scherzo character that, I mean, it's a very fraught Scherzo. It's a very intense, like there's a lot of intense passion in this piece. And that's something I also sort of associate with Mario's music. These sort of melodramatic shifts in character, just as things get super intense, he sort of backs away and and there's like a little bit of a joke or something. And it seems to me that this spirit is sort of,
Mario's music and also Diego's music as well. I mean, like it's like super intense and it's really difficult technically. Like this is not, easy music to play, but it's worth the effort and the commitment to learning it, because when you sort of go to the next level and you're confident in your technical rendition of it, you can kind of see all the character and the humor and sort of like there's a lot of seriousness, but there's also like a lot of self-effacing quality to it as well. I mean, it's like a real kind of roller coaster ride of different emotions, and that's what kind of draws us to it, I think.
And then also just the beauty of this particular aesthetic of gestural, colorful music, that it's not just happening because of a certain pattern or because of it's trying to do X, Y, and Z. It's because it's what actually musically makes sense,
right?
And that was like when, like any group, like when you're first trying to line up all the gestures, you're like, okay, where and is this right and everything, and then after doing each section a bunch of times, when you finally find that flow of what's musical, that's what makes it really magical. And I think coming off the heels of doing all that work with Mario, this was a really beautiful extension working on your piece for this kind of music, because again, like I think all of us in the group write very differently. And so your this particular piece that you've written is just this really nice bridge to that aesthetic when we worked with it last. So there's really
right. It's complexity, but not for complexity's sake. There's real meaning there, and there's a real underlying sense of of form and gesture and like an emotional component, which is so important, but to have a unique voice. I think that's the great thing about all the composers in counter induction. Everyone has a completely unique voice, and it's just remarkable that every composer we've done, everyone in the group can be sort of personally identified by their own style, which is wonderful. I think that.
But still sort of resonate together in,
Right,
in
exactly.
an interesting way.
It's
And
the
I
version
think,
that those styles are.
yeah,
All kind
exactly.
of make sense together, which is weird, right? So.
And I think you said something really interesting about Diego's music in general, and this piece in particular, in that there's a sort of honesty in the emotionality of the music, but the way I think about it is that it's never a representation of music, a representation of emotion. It's sort of an environment that provokes things. And so it never falls down into that collapsed space of, showing. If you live through it. And I think that's, I'm played one of Diego's pieces, but I think the great composers like Meyer, like Diego.
I just remember during rehearsals, when you're first rehearsing a piece and you're like, okay, there's all these things and then the colors, and then you're discovering the subtleties as you go. And then there's that moment where it's like you're cracking a safe and you're like, oh, that's how this lines up. And now that's how this flows together. And so it's the process of discovery that, that was really rewarding with Diego's piece, in finding how all of these things flow in his way of like gestural, spectral expression. That was really, really nice.
Yeah.
You are so generous. I told you a million times that you are so generous, and you have all my gratitude forever. Yes.
Likewise. This is about a minute of Diego Tedesco's scherzo, and Miranda's on violin again, of course, Jess on viola, Caleb on cello, Ben on clarinet, and myself on guitar. Here we go.
So we have a show coming up, and it is at the America Society. Well, no, it's sponsored by the America Society, but we recorded it at Octaven Audio with Ryan and some wonderful videographers. And it's going to be presented on December 17th at 7 p.m. And we would love for you to join us.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for hopping on the Zoom. It's fun to hang out with you guys today. And thanks to anybody who's watching. And again, this was Against Method. It came out a couple weeks ago. You can check it out at newfocusrecordings.com. You can find it at all the places that you buy or don't buy music, all over the internet. We also give a great shout out to Jessica Slavin, who did the wonderful design, and Diego Tedesco, whose artwork is featured on the cover. Beautifully captured the project. So thanks again, and looking forward to seeing everybody in the virtual world and hopefully the real world in not too long. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.